The governments of the world have strategic stockpiles to ensure the continuity of government and survival of disasters like World War III. The problem is there isn't enough supplies to go around, so you need to get prepared.
Today we're going back to basics. This prepping stuff can get incredibly complicated. We're going to simplify it for you. Today we're going to talk about building your own strategic reserve. Let's get to it. What is a strategic reserve? Governments of the world have these strategic reserves for all of the essentials of life. For example, in the United States, they have a strategic oil reserve. They have a strategic medicine stockpile. They also have a war reserve stock for ammunition and weapons. We also, in some countries, have strategic grain reserves. They even have 80,000 dams and reservoirs, man-made lakes, for the sole purpose of ensuring a water supply. There's even gold reserves. Why do you think there's gold reserves? Because they know that paper money someday might be worthless. As much as the government tries to prepare for emergencies, there's certainly not enough to go around, especially if there's a nationwide disaster. That's why the onus is on you, the individual, to make your own strategic reserve. So today we're going to be talking about building your own fuel reserve, building your own strategic medicine reserve, building your own strategic ammunition stockpile, your own food or grain reserve, and of course, water. So a strategic reserve is the reserve of a commodity or items that is held back from normal use by governments, organizations, or businesses in pursuance of a particular strategy or to cope with unexpected emergency events. One of the primary reserves that people are familiar with is the Strategic Oil Reserve. The Strategic Petroleum Reserve is a U.S. government complex of 4 sites with deep underground storage caverns created in salt domes along the Texas and Louisiana Gulf coasts. However, this reserve's ability to respond is limited. Consider that all of the oil in this reserve is unrefined. This isn't going to do us much good if refineries are disrupted in a national emergency. And almost all of these reserve storage sites are on the Gulf Coast. This potentially complicates distribution, especially considering this is a place which is prone to hurricanes. And furthermore, the law generally limits releases to times of national rather than regional disruption. What about the Strategic Medicine Reserve? Well, the Strategic National Stockpile, originally called the National Pharmaceutical Stockpile, is the United States' national repository for antibiotics, vaccines, chemical antidotes, antitoxins, and other critical medical supplies. In at least 10 government reports published from 2003 to 2015, federal officials predicted that the U.S. would experience a shortage of ventilators and other medical supplies in such case that a large-scale infectious disease outbreak occurred. Now, the actual supply of the drugs and supplies that comprise the Strategic National Stockpile are located in 12 secret locations, strategically placed throughout the United States. These locations appear to look like ordinary commercial warehouses, but inside the warehouses, supplies are stacked on shelves that can be measured 5 stories high. What about the Strategic Food Reserve, also known as the Strategic Grain Reserve? A strategic grain reserve is a government stockpile of grain for the purpose of meeting future domestic and international needs. In the United States, there no longer is a strategic grain reserve. Some countries that are net exporters of grain don't see this as a high priority. However, in countries like China, this is a country that now stockpiles 2/3 of the global grain reserves. And the contents of the silos in China are only available on the domestic market with no shipments going abroad. This has raised some eyebrows of a few people wondering, what exactly is China preparing for? Now, in terms of water reservoirs, there's 84,000 dams and man-made water reservoirs throughout North America. A reservoir is a large, natural or artificial lake used as a water source or supply. Many arid countries like Mexico or North African or Arab states actually have designated strategic water reserves. However, in most places where water is in relative abundance, this is not particularly necessary. What about the Strategic Ammo Reserve? Well, this is actually called a war reserve stock. As some of you might be aware that the US has currently banned the export of firearms and ammunition for 3 months. The United States Department of Commerce said that it would stop issuing export licenses for most civilian firearms and ammunition for 90 days for all non-governmental users, citing national security and foreign policy interests, obviously with relation to the war. A war reserve stock, also known as pre-positioned stocks, this is a collection of warfighting material held in reserve in pre-positioned storage to be used during wartime. They may be located strategically depending on where it is believed they will be needed. In addition to military equipment, a war reserve stock might also include raw materials that might become scarce during wartime. And last but not least, there's the gold reserves. How much gold does the US have in reserve? And why do they have so much gold? The US gold reserves have more than 8,000 metric tons of gold. That's nearly as much gold as the next 3 countries combined. Obviously, in the case of a national or global emergency, paper money may no longer be recognized. So the question is, if the government has all of the aforementioned strategic reserves, why don't individuals? Prepping can get incredibly complicated in terms of how you should prioritize your limited amount of resources. Today, we're going to try to simplify the process for you. The most important things, as already mentioned, are fuel, medicine, ammunition, food, water, and gold and precious metals. That last one, quite frankly, is not entirely necessary, especially for a limited emergency situation. So starting with building your own strategic energy reserve. We've done extensive videos on this topic, so we're not going to go in great amounts of depth today. But on the table here, you can see we have some kerosene, we have some gasoline, we have a lead acid battery, we have some propane, and we have some fuel stabilizer. Having fuel stabilizer is going to be essential if you have a lot of fuel in storage and you don't plan on using it in 6 months, or you don't want to have to cycle it through as much. Gasoline has a limited shelf life of around 6 months to 12 months, depending on how it's stored. If you add fuel stabilizer, that can extend the life by around a year. Propane is an excellent fuel to store, although it is a little bit more volatile, so you do have to be careful. And of course, you can get larger tanks. A lot of people who have homesteads, acreages will have a larger designated propane reservoir, but you can also buy it in small amounts as well. And of course, there's other ways to acquire energy via solar, wind power. We've done numerous videos on getting a house outfitted with solar panels, as well as portable options. Kerosene can come in handy for heating and lighting, and it's also a less volatile fuel. As well as diesel, it's slightly less volatile and it will last a little bit longer as well. Fuel is going to be so essential in a collapse situation. Not the most essential potentially, but especially if you live in a winter climate, having some kind of fuel, some sort of combustible energy source, or in the very least, some sort of renewable energy source, is going to allow you to have adequate shelter. And propane is great, especially in winter environments, because you'll be able to utilize heaters that can keep your space warm. Now, building your own pharmaceutical medicine stockpile can be a little bit more complicated and take a little bit more work. Anybody can go down to the pharmacy and buy the over-the-counter stuff, but what a lot of people are concerned about is those medications that are only accessible if you have a prescription. Well, now there's a very easy way that you can do that. You can get a variety of different chronic health medications or medications that formerly would require that prescription, like antibiotics, hundreds of other medications through a program called Jase Medical. We've done extensive videos on this particular product line. I would encourage you to go and check that out. I will post a link in the description below. Medication is going to be a lifesaver, especially if you're a person who relies on those chronic medications. That is going to be of utmost importance for your survival. Now, moving on over here, I don't think this needs a lot of explanation. Just building your own ammunition stockpile. The ammunition prices continue to rise as a result of stocks being depleted worldwide as a result of all the wars that are currently being fought and likely will be fought in the not so distant future. So if you ever find a deal on ammunition, stockpile it. There are ways to store it so it lasts a little bit longer. It's incredible how fast ammunition can start to go during a wartime. I don't know the exact statistic, but as far as I know, For every soldier that dies in a war, it usually takes 10,000 to 100,000 bullets. So that should put in perspective of just how much ammunition you might actually need if things get really, really ugly. Food is no different, okay? I think a lot